Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl, and today I'm sharing the books I read in August. Last month I went through the challenges last. This month I'm going to do them first. For the Read Your Bookshelf challenge of Maud vs. Doyle from Chantel Reads All Day. For August, the Maud side was Along the Shore, a book that has water on the cover. For that, I read the 5th City Spies book, Mission Manhattan, because it's raining outside this window on the cover. I liked this book, as I have with all the other City Spies books, but I felt like this was the weakest one of the bunch so far. I felt like the climate change part of the storyline took over from the spying a little bit in this book, and so I didn't enjoy it as much. For the Doyle side, the prompt was The Adventure of Wisteria Lodge, a house on the cover. And for this, I chose A Heart Deceived by Michelle Griep. I'm going to have to put a picture up because I've already gotten rid of it, which makes it obvious how I felt about the book. I've really enjoyed every book I've read by her so far, but this one felt very different. And I ended up DNFing it partway through, and then I flipped to the end just to kind of see what happened. But it was a lot darker, more violent than the other ones have been, which I found funny since her other ones are retellings of Frankenstein and Dracula. But this one felt a lot darker than those. I guess it just felt depressing. So I DNF'd that one. I was planning on reading one of my last 2 Sherlock Holmes books in August, but I decided to actually save both of those for October. So I didn't read any of my Sherlock Holmes books this month. And for Katie's Read Around the World-a-thon, the prompt was Set in a Place You Would Like to Live. And I read Wormwood Abbey. This tells the story of a family that inherits a manor that the father was kind of disowned by his family, but now that he's the next male heir, he has inherited this manor. So they go up to visit it and meet the cousins that still live there. And there's more to this area and place than they believe. It's a fantasy, and this takes place in Yorkshire in England. I loved visiting it, so I think I would love living there. I loved this book. It was such a delightful book to read. I loved the voice of the writer. And the story was really, really fun. I loved the writing. I loved the characters, environment, everything. Everything about the book I loved. It was my second favorite book of the month. There was also good faith content, references to other books. It was just an overall really enjoyable reading experience. There was one quote I really loved from it. It was a G.K. Chesterton quote that was put in it. I will sit still and let the marvels and the adventures settle on me like flies. There are plenty of them, I assure you. The world will never starve for want of wonders, but only for want of wonder. So obviously, I highly recommend this book. I also did not get to the Buzzword-a-thon in August. The prompt was like. I mentioned that I had a few that could probably work for that, but I just never was able to get to those. In the G3 challenge, one of the prompts is a Psalter. And so I read John MacArthur's book on the Psalms and did this study. And I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was a little bit different than I expected it to be. It was more of a thematic study of the Psalms, not a chapter by chapter study. So there were chapters that were not in here. And I wanted to read the whole book of Psalms. So what I would do is I would do the chapter in here, read the books that had to do with that theme and the study of that theme. And then in between the chapters, I would read whatever chapters were missing. And so I was able to get through the whole book of Psalms in August and then also do this thematic study. And I did really enjoy it. Just like anything John MacArthur puts out, I really like it. The Bookish Princess book club was The Way of Perfection. I did not read that. I didn't read any more Harry Potter books because I was saving those for September. The last ongoing challenge that I actually read from in August was for my British literature course. I did get to Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. This was a reread for me, but it had been many years since I've read this before. It's definitely a slower story, and there were some parts of the book that are slower than others, but it's a really enjoyable read. I love all 3 of the Bronte sisters' writing so much, and I think it's interesting how good they all are, but they're also so distinct. Like, this is very different from Wuthering Heights, and this is very different from Jane Eyre. There were a few times in the book that made me laugh out loud, and I'm glad that I finally reread this. I want to get to The Tenant of Wildfell Hall again as well. I did write down 2 quotes that I really loved. The book is kind of told as if Agnes Grey is telling her story later. And when she's telling about her mother and how her mother married someone that her family didn't approve of and was disowned for it, she says, an elegant house and spacious grounds were not to be despised, but she would rather live in a cottage with Richard Grey than in a palace with any other man in the world. I loved that. And then another just partial quote from a sentence, when it was describing someone, it said, she had a nose that seemed to disdain the earth. And you can immediately picture that. I did read one other one for my British literature course, and that was The Rivals by Richard Brinsley Sheridan. This was a play about mishaps where people are pretending to be other people, and it's about different love connections. This was actually from 1775, so it's very old. It was a little bit harder of a play to read for me than some of the other ones I've read, and it's not one of my favorites, but I did like it. I'm glad I read it, and I think it would be different if you saw it in person, the way plays are, meant to be. I think it would be pretty fun to see this in person. There was one kind of ongoing gag where one woman always is saying well-known phrases incorrectly. One of them where she meant to say pinnacle, she said he was the very pineapple of politeness. And for some reason that one just made me laugh. And then one of the insults in it that I thought was really funny was a vile sheep-hearted blockhead. So I did enjoy it for the most part. I spent a lot of the month reading enrichment books for homeschooling and books that were helping me with my planning of homeschool because we're starting up this week. And one of them that I read for the first time was Mere Motherhood by Cindy Rollins. This isn't really a book about how to homeschool, it's just a book about her life. It's kind of a memoir, and I really enjoyed this. Toward the end, I was relating a little bit less to her, and their story is very different than mine, but I did enjoy it. I think she's a really good writer, and there were definitely some really funny stories in here as well. And I did write down a couple of quotes that were meaningful to me. On the early days of motherhood, it is a walk of joy that often includes the tearing off of the old dragon skin, one painful layer at a time. Made all the worse because you didn't even know you were wearing dragon skin. No one ever does. There was also a quote, fear does damage everywhere it appears. And I've had times in my life when I've been very fearful of things, and I find that those are the times I make the wrong choices. It's when I'm not handling things the best. I'm not being my best self. And then there was a C.S. Lewis quote, and it was very interesting because I was learning a lot about something called the tripartite soul, which I'm going to talk about in a different video. But as I was learning about that, I was reading this book, and she quoted C.S. Lewis, "We make men without chests and expect from them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst." I've read that quote before, and I always thought it was a good quote, but I actually didn't understand what he meant by make men without chests. I kind of just assumed the context of it. Reading about the tripartite soul, I finally understood. And so again, I'll talk about that in another video. There were a couple other books that I read during that time about motherhood or homeschooling that I didn't read the whole thing, so I'm going to share those really quick, but none of these, I didn't read any of the 4 of these completely. I started The Art of Storytelling. This is from The Well-Educated Mother from the Libraries of Hope, and I picked this up in a little free library a few months ago. I started to read through this and I did not like it at all, so I'm going to take it back to the little free library. I started Beyond Mere Motherhood by Cindy Rollins, and this is mainly about, as a mother, books to read, things to do to make sure you're feeding your own soul. And this was actually really good, but I didn't read the whole thing. I just kind of flipped through some of it, and I plan on reading the whole thing later just because I had so many things I needed to get to and it wasn't something I needed right then. And then I had picked up Rooted in Wonder by Erin Lynham at the Homeschool Convention in June, and I really enjoyed her classes, and I started to flip through it, and this is really good actually, but I really think this is for moms with younger children. There were some things that I could, adapt for older kids, but this was something that would have been amazing when my kids were little. Definitely recommend this if you have kids, probably under 10, but especially in the younger preschool to mid-elementary ages. And then I started to reread Awaking Wonder by Sally Clarkson, but it hasn't been that long since I read this one, so I kind of went just to a few different parts that I knew I wanted to reread right now. This is a great book, and I recommend it too. Just didn't read the whole thing. And then as far as the books that I was reading as I was planning some things for homeschool this year, little preview, I think I've touched on it enough that people probably figured out. I'm going to be having Harry Potter in my daughter's homeschool, and I really wanted to be able to use it in a literary way, showing the literary connections and diving really deep into it since she already knows the story. So that is one of the reasons I mentioned in a previous video that I was listening to a Harry Potter podcast and I took a Harry Potter class. And then I've also been reading some of the books one that I already owned, and then 2 that they recommended in the class. So I was going through those as I was putting this curriculum together. So I will share about that curriculum later, but the 3 books that I read, one that was the reread was Looking for God and Harry Potter. The 2 that were new were Harry Potter's Bookshelf, also by John Granger, and Literary Allusions in Harry Potter by Beatrice Groves. So first I'm going to talk about Harry Potter's bookshelf and Looking for God in Harry Potter. These, like I said, are both from John Granger. These books spoil a lot of books. So in Looking for God in Harry Potter, I shared this on my video last week. And the whole thing is pretty much just telling you, telling the story of how he found Harry Potter, why he read it as a Christian, and talks about the Christian symbols and elements in the Harry Potter books and the series. However, he wrote this before the 7th book came out, so it is not a complete picture of the whole series and its Christian themes. I wish that he had made a new version with added chapters where you could go get an updated edition. Maybe he will eventually, I'm not sure. But as for now, it doesn't have the 7th book. And then in Harry Potter's bookshelf, he talks about the great books behind the Harry Potter books. So books that would have been inspirations to J.K. Rowling, books that are her favorite books, and talking about the different connections between them. This goes through Jane Austen books, it goes through Charles Dickens books, Dracula, Frankenstein, Dorothy Sayers books, Lewis and Tolkien books, the Tom Brown Schoolboys books, Bronte sisters books, Jekyll and Hyde, Gulliver's Travels, Plato, and Shakespeare, the Odyssey. Like, it goes through so many classic books, and it's really good. And if you've read all of the things that he is referencing and the Harry Potter books, it's so good. But he spoils every single book that he references. He tells the whole story of all of them. And so I think there was only one in here that I hadn't read. I can't remember what it was that I hadn't read, but there was one that I hadn't read, but I didn't really care about being spoiled with it. So if you're interested in it, I would get it. But as soon as he starts talking about a book, if you haven't read it and don't want to be spoiled, you'll need to skip to the next section. Don't know that he could have done it without spoiling it, since he's talking about the things they have in common. But yeah, it was definitely high spoilers. And I believe the Looking for God in Harry Potter might have spoils things for Harry Potter for sure. But I think it does for a few things. I just can't remember on that. And then the literary allusions in Harry Potter, it kind of does the same thing. She talks about Shakespeare, the poetry of Ovid, Sir Gawain. If any experts here, I need to look this up online. But I always thought it was Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, because in the show Merlin, there is a Sir Gawain. And he's my favorite character. But in the class I took, she said Gawain. And so anyone who knows better than me, let me know if I'm pronouncing it right or wrong when I say Gawain. Chaucer and Milton and Tennyson, Austen, Hardy, Dickens, and you also will get spoiled on some of those in here. She doesn't spoil them quite as much as John Granger does, but there definitely is some spoilage for the allusions so that you understand them. This was actually my favorite book of the month, and I didn't expect it to be. It has this awesome picture from the Bodleian Library in Oxford, which is one of my favorite places I've ever been. So I really enjoyed the cover. But the writing is really small, and it almost looked like it was going to be more textbooky when I first started reading it. But I really loved her writing style, and I learned a lot from this book. Even with having the other books I was reading and the class, I really, really loved it. My life has been very immersive in Harry Potter for the past couple of weeks, with planning the readathon, planning the stuff for homeschool, and taking all these classes, reading all these books. And I recommend the podcast, the class, and all 3 of these books. They're all so good, but this one was definitely my favorite one. I also took about 5 to 10 minutes to read A Dog Named Sniff. This is from the Good and the Beautiful library. It's a young reader. For little kids, I think this is really cute. There is not much to the story, but it's cute enough for the smallest of kids. I also read Lantern Lane, book 1. This is also from the Good and the Beautiful library. This is a story of a young girl. They live in this little area. There is a forbidden forest nearby, and there is royalty. Her father goes up to the mountains, and he doesn't come back. So she and her mother and her brother go looking for him. They can't find him. Everybody is looking for her father. But then all of a sudden the story switches, and the princess is going through the town and sees her and mistakes her for someone else and takes her to the palace. And the rest of the book is just her at the palace. And I thought that was kind of strange. I kept waiting to go back to the father story, but it is the first in a series, so that probably is why. I thought it was okay. But it's a level 6, which I believe is supposed to be upper middle grade to junior high-ish, but I don't know, based on this book, I'm thinking I might be wrong about the levels with The Good and the Beautiful. So you'd have to look at it, because this felt more like a 3rd or 4th grade book in the way it was written and the subject matter. Anywhere from 1st to 4th grade I don't know. Like, it felt very young. It felt very young to me. I thought this was a level 3. And then I looked at the side and realized it was a 6. I am not at all interested in reading the rest of the series, but a young kid might be. The rest of the series might be really awesome once you get the whole thing. And I think that younger middle grade kids would enjoy it. The last book I'm going to share is The Women of Winstons by Donna Mumma. It says a classic 1950s mystery. This tells the story of all these women that work at this department store, and there's a huge mystery. There's murders happening, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. It tells the story from 4 different perspectives of 4 different women that work there. And I read this with the book club on Instagram. My only disappointment with that was that there was a reading schedule of every week how many chapters you read, and then on Friday there would be a discussion. I thought it would be a discussion about what was actually happening in the book, but it wasn't. It was just questions that kind of pertained to maybe that section of the book a little bit, but not about the book. It'd be about your own life. And so do you listen to gossip, or do you do this or whatever? And so I didn't realize before doing that that's how she ran the book club there on Instagram. And I believe it's so that there's no spoilers for people that are not reading it but want to go and see what people are saying. And so it was fun to answer the questions and do all that, but I probably won't do it again because I wanted to talk to people about what was actually in this book. And I really enjoyed this book. In fact, on the last part of it, I just let go of my schedule and just finished reading it because I really wanted to find out what happened. Been a long time since a book had me so emotionally involved in something that was happening that I was actually tense and feeling the knots in my stomach. And that happened in this because I was so frustrated with all the people in it. And that started early on and stayed most of the way because there's one character who I really liked, and she's made out to be a villain by everybody. Everybody hates her and they all talk bad about her and they're so mean about it. And yet she is the best character. I liked the mystery. I liked the pacing. I liked the story. It's very clean. I'd definitely be interested in reading more by this author. I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad that I did take part in that book club, even though it wasn't exactly what I thought, because I'd never even heard of this book before she shared it. And then I've seen a few other people share it since then. But yeah, I highly recommend this one as well. I forgot to mention that I also read The Cuckoos Calling by Robert Galbraith. I DNF'd this book and I didn't have it anymore, and so I completely forgot to mention it. This book had an interesting story and it was very well written. Almost right away, I noticed that there was just way more swearing than I enjoy reading, and I kind of pushed through because I was interested in the book and what was happening and the characters. But it got to a point where there would just be multiple swear words on every single page. So I ended up stopping partway through it and then going to the end and just seeing what the resolution of the mystery was. There were a lot of gritty characters being interviewed by the detective in it. And so I kind of understand why there was this inclusion of that kind of language. But I don't enjoy reading that. And I won't be reading any more of these books in this series. For August, I think my favorite books were definitely The Literary Illusion and Harry Potter was my favorite book. The 2 books I liked the most in August after that one were The Wormwood Abbey and Women of Wynton. I'd say those 3. Yeah, those 3 are my top 3 of the month. But now I'm really excited it's September and we get to start reading books for the readathon. I would love to hear if you're taking part in that, and I would love to hear what you read, what your favorite book was in August.